Good afternoon, good evening, representatives of member states, members of the Awesome Knowledge Network, colleagues from the UN system entities, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to this webinar, organized jointly by the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, of the African Union Permanent Observer to the United Nations, on how science, technology, and innovation policies can unleash sustainable industrialization in Africa. My name is Kavadewa Kashomuse, Senior Economic Affairs Officer in the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, and it's a great pleasure to have you join this webinar today. But before we begin, just a few housekeeping matters. The webinar has simultaneous interpretation in English and French. To access it, click on the interpretation option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I request our speakers to mute their microphones when they are not speaking so that we can have a smooth and uninterrupted session for all the participants in the webinar. I appreciate your cooperation and look forward to a great conversation with you this morning. This webinar brings experts from a broad spectrum of sectors, policymaking, academia, civil society, and youth to explore the challenges and opportunities for leveraging science, technology, and innovation, particularly STEM education and intellectual property rights to promote industrialization in Africa. The webinar will deliberate on the issues raised in a draft policy note on STI and industrialization prepared by OSA's colleagues. We hope to use the substantive inputs and discussion from the webinar to further enrich the policy brief for possible publication and dissemination later in July. The outcome of this webinar, much like the office work, will support African countries' engagement in the UN's intergovernmental processes, including ongoing discussions and preparatory work leading to the Summit of the Future in September this year. Ladies and gentlemen, science, technology, and innovation is key to unlocking Africa's future, which will harness the potential of young people. STI must play a central role in driving Africa's development in virtually every sector: health, education, agriculture, and industry. The upgrading of production and its diversification, which can lead to increased productivity and employment creation, is ultimately the result of technological innovation. However, despite the recognition of the importance of STI for Africa's development and structural transformation, African countries fall considerably behind other regions in terms of STI skills development. STEM education and intellectual property rights, therefore, can play an important role in closing the STI gap through investment in human capital, which can foster industrialization and structural transformation. Now, what are the challenges and opportunities for leveraging STI for Africa's industrialization? What specific policy levers could be deployed to further unlock the contribution of STI through STEM education and IP for industrialization and tackling the challenge of unemployment, especially youth unemployment? And how could university, working in partnership with government and industry, help co-create sustainable solutions to Africa's development? I hope our panelists will help us explore some of these issues this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting program before you. We will kick off the webinar with opening remarks from Ms. Christina Duarte, Under-Secretary General and Special Advisor of the UN Secretary General on Africa. This will be followed by a brief presentation of the background note, how science, technology, and innovation policies can unleash sustainable industrialization in Africa by my colleague, Mr. K. Tagawa, Program Management Officer in OSA. After the presentation, we will dive straight into our panel discussion to be moderated by Ms. Rubitsai Andebayo, Program Management Officer in the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa. The panel discussion will be followed by a Q&A. We will then hear closing remarks from Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, Director, Policy Monitoring and Advocacy, Office of the Special Advisor on Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to invite our USG, Ms. Christina Duarte, USG and Special Advisor on Africa, to deliver her opening remarks. USG, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kava. Good afternoon. Good afternoon from Portugal. Good morning to New York. Good evening, who is following from other time difference. In the past 3 years, the office that supports me as special advisor, we have been organizing events, writing knowledge products to create a bold and consistent narrative around science, technology, and innovation, industrialization, and how stemming the intellectual property rights are two critical issues in this ecosystem. So I'm delighted that again today we have the opportunity to go even deeper on this conversation. Allow me, first of all, to welcome all participants to this timely webinar on a topic, of course, of huge importance for Africa's future. And it's interesting how today's webinar builds on what we discussed a couple of weeks ago, Kava and the participants, on our Africa Dialogue series that we delivered during the month of May. For 30 days, we brought Africa to the New York stage. And for 30 days, I would say, usually I would say 24/7, we discuss education, and we try to link education with peace and security, with conflict, with industrialization, with job creation, you name it. And here again, you are trying to link science, technology, innovation, STEM, as Kava mentions very well, with industrialization. Allow me to start. When I was preparing for my remarks, I decided to start this conversation with something that has become a nightmare in Africa from a policy-making standpoint: unemployment. As we speak, unemployment has become a nightmare. It's not a surprise, because it is a result of demographic dynamics, and I would say from one side, and the other side is a result of an African economy that is facing so much challenge to deliver on job creation. We know that annually around 80 million young people, young Africans, enter the labor market. We also know that only 3 to 4 million get a job. And most of the time, not a decent job. Most of the time. As we have said in one of the reports that we published last year, 95% of the young Africans in the bracket between 15 years and 35, 95% succeed in having a job in the informal sector. And in fact, Africa is the only region in the world where self-employment in the informal sector represents 84% of the employment. We also know that today, more than 250 million workers live below the moderate poverty line of $3 per day, which means that to have a job in Africa does not mean to be out or above the poverty line. Of course, this unemployment and lack of decent jobs has become a source of instability and conflict, painful migrations, displacement. And I believe that we should not be surprised how come African countries in the last 2 years accounted for over 1/3 of world terrorism-related deaths, 9 million in internal displacements. So we are in a situation where unemployment and the lack of decent job is feeding in a strong way instability and conflict. And instability and conflict is eating the budget structure of African countries, taking money away from education and health, which becomes a very negative process, a very negative spiral in terms of preventing Africa to deliver the sustainable development goals. So it is well accepted, not to say common sense, that Africa reach a point, based on what I just presented in a very summarized way, reach a point where industrialization is no longer a policy option, but an imperative. We have no alternative. With this picture that I just presented in a very summarized way, industrialization is no longer a policy option, but an imperative. We also know that past attempts in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 90s have failed, but also for well-known reasons that I don't think are relevant to this conversation, but there are some others knowledge products that we try to explain the reasons behind these past failures. This is one side of the coin. Let's flip the coin and see the other side of the coin. The other side of the coin, or on the other end, Africa is missing a huge opportunity. The growing middle class, to build a broad-based producer economy, raising purchasing power, and facilitate the demand for efficiencies in both the public and private sector. We all know that ultimately, Africa's growing middle class provides the continent with one of its most formidable assets, an expanding market. And this is what industrialization needs, an expanding market. So industrialization policies, industrialization process can meet with scale, can find scale. But Africa can miss this opportunity of having a growing middle class. That is the most important ingredient to feed an industrialization process. And on the other side, 80 million young Africans just landing on Africa's labor market. So the emphasis in the past, I would say 30 years, has been more on eradicating poverty through aid rather than promoting prosperity through improved infrastructure, education, entrepreneurship, and trade. But this is changing. Now there is a growing emphasis on policies that produce a middle class. And if you don't grab this opportunity, this middle class will buy. This middle class is enjoying growing purchasing power. This middle class will buy imports. And imports will basically take away our international reserves. So, from a policy-making standpoint, what is the missing piece in this equation? Between 80 million jobs and huge opportunity of a growing middle class, and acknowledge that industrialization is no longer a policy option, but a policy imperative. Of course, most of the 80 million jobs should come from manufacturing, industrialization. But these are not state functions. State in Africa cannot have the responsibility to create the 8 million jobs. State, from a public policy standpoint, have the responsibility to create conducive environments so that manufacturing industries can be unleashed. Who is going to create most of the 80 million jobs? Different levels, different categories of private sector to absorb part of the 80 million. Of course, mid and large industries, but allow me to focus on self-employment. And I'm about to finish. Self-employment. Allow me to focus on small and medium enterprise will play a critical role. And then comes the role of the state to create conditions so this self-employment potential, this small and medium enterprise potential can be unleashed. So the state should create a conducive environment at least to get 5 out of 10 unemployed, young unemployed to become entrepreneurs, because the state cannot provide the 80 million. And by doing so, this self-employment, these small and medium enterprise, they should be competitive. They should be innovative. Then comes science, technology, and innovation. Then comes STEM. Then comes intellectual property right. But not as a gourmet, in a couple of private schools, no. But as a service that needs to be supplied in a massive way by the state. And I finish by saying, as long as we succeed in bringing Wi-Fi to a remote village, before building the school, let's deliver STEM, even under a baobab tree, to make STEM a massive product or a massive service delivered by state. As we approach basic education, as we approach secondary education, we should also approach STEM. To finish, of course, in order to deliver, let's say, this conceptual framework from a policy-making standpoint, of course, we need to cover, as you know, we need to address the energy paradox. Because without energy, we cannot bring Wi-Fi, and you cannot bring STEM, and you cannot tackle intellectual property rights. So there are basics that needs to be in place, and are not. 600 million people without energy, it's clear that basics are not in place. Assuming that we manage to tackle energy access, then STEM should become a massive service provided by state to unleash the potential of self-employment in African civil societies to boost the small and medium enterprise. They will give a huge contribution in terms of job creation and absorbing the 80 million jobs. Thank you very much. Kava, back to you.
Thank you so much, USJ, for those inspiring remarks, which have set the stage for today's meeting. You underscore the challenge of unemployment for Africa and the critical role that industry could play in addressing this problem. You said that industrialization, and I like what you said, industrialization is no longer an option, but an imperative, a necessity. Thank you so much. So we have come to the end of our opening session, and now I'm going to invite my colleague, Mr. Kei Tagawa, to present key issues from the policy note. Kei, you have around 7 minutes.
Thank you, Kava. Could you see the screen? My presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Kei Tagawa, Program Management Officer at OSA. My presentation today is to briefly introduce substantive issues of STI and industrialization as food for thought for the panel discussion which follows. As USG duality has just set the stage, African countries must pursue industrialization with a heightened sense of urgency to create jobs and move the needle in global value chain. This can only be attained by enhancing human productive capacities and introducing new technologies and innovations through the promotion of sound STI policies. As you can see, we are covering indicated topics today. At the end, I briefly introduce some key questions for the discussion. Despite efforts to diversify, most African countries still depending on the exporting raw natural resources, namely agriculture, mining, and fuel. And 84% of Africa's total imports in 2020 were manufactured products. The dark blue line in the graph indicates Africa's manufacturing value added as a proportion of GDP since 2000. And Africa's MVA has been the lowest in the world and 10.3% in 2023. This low industrialization leads to high unemployment rates, especially among the youth, as underlined by the USG duality. In Africa, excluding North Africa, it is estimated about 18 million new jobs are needed annually to match the number of young people entering the job markets until 2035. So promoting industrialization is imperative to create a job in Africa. Usually, African manufacturing firms produce only basic goods for local market. Key challenges for industrialization in Africa include infrastructure deficit, especially energy, skills and education gaps, as well as market fragmentation and small domestic markets. Regarding these unfavorable market conditions, however, the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA, provides prospects to reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers and create larger regional markets. African countries have several opportunities to boost industrialization. Given that agriculture is the backbone of many African economies, agriculture should take leading role in Africa's industrialization. However, despite rich agricultural resources, Africa currently imports about US 80 billion worth of food annually to fill the supply gap. By increasing domestic agricultural production through import substitution industrialization, called ISI policies, Africa can reduce its dependence on imports, improve its balance of payments, and create conditions for sustainable industrialization. Africa has immense natural resources, but they are exported without value addition. So it is crucial to turn these resources into finished high-value products for local and global markets. Africa should also leverage its abundance of critical minerals and metals, which are essential for technology-intensive industries. Countries like Namibia, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe are now banning the export of raw lithium to encourage value addition and beneficiation at the national level. Africa also relies heavily on imported medicine, making the continent vulnerable to supply chain disruption as seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. To tackle this, countries like Egypt, Morocco, and South Africa have significantly increased their pharmaceutical industries through economic reforms, including ISI and effective STI policies. Achieving industrialization requires a significant boost in productivity. So STI are critical enablers and solutions to advance industrialization. In particular, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or STEM education is vital for equipping African youth with much needed knowledge and skills. Human capital with strong STEM skills will increase economic productivity, so driving industrialization. In turn, accelerated industrialization will create jobs and resources for investment in human capital development. So STEM education and industrialization create the virtuous circle. Education and investment, therefore, should be directed to enhance the employability of the youth workforce in STEM careers in industry. Scientific and technological innovation promotes productivity. An effective intellectual property or IP ecosystem that effectively protects these innovations can unlock Africa's potential by mobilizing and protecting local innovations. However, in 2022, as indicated, Africa made up less than 1% of the world's patent applications, indicating there is a vast untapped potential for local innovations. A calibrated IP ecosystem also encourages international technology transfer, thus strengthening productive capacities. Advanced STI can transform Africa's economy by promoting resource-based and import substitution industrialization. The results could lead to quick wins for Africa's economic diversification and accelerate industrialization processes. In this respect, Africa could learn further from the successes of other regions, particularly East Asia, where the countries have been strategically harnessing STI to drive industrialization and create jobs. STI, especially digital technology, is the key to leapfrog the developmental stages through digital transformation in this era of the fourth industrial revolution. On the other hand, without STI, Africa risks deepening the digital divide due to a lack of digital literacy, skills, and infrastructure. Finally, I would like to present a few key issues that emanate from the background note. How can African countries effectively leverage STI policies for industrialization? How to promote STEM education? How can IP ecosystem be effective in promoting industrialization? How does the implementation of the AFCFTA contribute to harnessing STI for industrialization? And lastly, what kind of partnerships should be further leveraged at international, regional, and national level? This concludes my presentation, and I look forward to the panel discussion learning from the distinguished panelists. Thank you for your attention. Back to moderator Kaba. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kay, for your presentation, which is very clear. It highlights the challenges and opportunities for promoting industrialization in Africa and the role that STI could play in addressing some of these challenges. The presentation, of course, will be shared with all the participants. Without further ado, we are moving now to our panel discussion, and it will be moderated by my colleague, Ms. Rumbitsai Andebayo. Rumbi, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you, Kava. So, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we now begin our panel discussion. I would like to thank my colleague Kay for the presentation and also for the opening remarks of Ms. Christina Duarte, which have set the stage for our discussion today. It is clear that industrialization can only be attained by enhancing the productivity of the workforce and introducing new technologies and innovation through the promotion of sound science, technology, and innovation STI policies. This raises questions like those my dear colleague Kay highlighted in his presentation, which is, how can African countries effectively leverage STI policies for industrialization? How can they promote STEM education to close the STI gap? And how can intellectual property ecosystems be effective in promoting industrialization? He also raised another issue. How does the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area contribute to harnessing STI for industrialization? So to discuss these questions and many others, let me introduce our distinguished panelists for this panel discussion on the theme, how science, technology, and innovation policies can unleash sustainable industrialization in Africa. So first of all, our panelists will provide their views in response to a set of questions that I'll ask them. And later on, those of you who are joining around the world will also have an opportunity to contribute to the discussion by asking questions to our panelists through the Zoom chat box or the question and answer function. And again, interpretation is available should you need it. So given that industrialization should be the endeavor of all stakeholders, from the government to academics to industry, it is with great delight that we have a panel consisting of experts from different fields and sectors. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists to you. So first, we have Mr. Kofi Agusu, who is the Deputy Regional Director for the Regional Office for Africa, International Labour Organization, ILO, in Abidjan. In his current capacity, he provides technical support to 18 countries and SADC Secretariat in labor statistics and labor market information systems. And prior to joining the ILO, he was the UNDP Regional Center in Dakar and as youth employment expert for the regional program for social cohesion and youth employment. You're welcome, Mr. Agusu.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. So our second panelist is Ms. Amel Kasri, who is currently the Chief of Section for the Basic Science and Research Innovation and Engineering, which is part of the Division of Science, Policy and Basic Science, Natural Sciences sector at UNESCO. Her major role is to design, implement, and monitor and evaluate basic and engineering sciences program in order to ensure the delivery of the expected results approved by the UNESCO governing bodies in the fields of basic and engineering sciences capacity development for research, education, and innovation. Ms. Kasri also delivers expert advice and comprehensive programs to member states. So Ms. Kasri, you're welcome to our panel this morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Yeah, so our third panelist is Mr. Fernando Santiago, who is the Industrial Policy Officer at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, where he specializes in policy advisory services on industrial policy to member states. Mr. Santiago represents UNIDO at the UN Interagency Task Team on Science, Technology, and Innovation. He's also a member of the Scientific Board of the Latin American Network for the study of learning systems, innovation, and competency building. He's also a technical advisor to the Network of Centers of Excellence of the Commission of Science Technology for Sustainable Development in the South. You are welcome, Mr. Santiago. Our fourth panelist is Mr. Getachew Mengistu Alemu, who is an intellectual property IP consultant who has served in over 22 countries, implementing IP projects supported by regional and international organizations such as the Africa Regional IP Organization, ARIPO, the European Commission, the World Bank, the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, UNDP, UNECA, and many others. He has drafted intellectual property laws, national IP policies and strategies, intellectual property rights enforcement strategies, national IP development plans for various African countries. You are welcome, Mr. Alemu. Moving on, our fifth panelist is Professor Shadrach Chirikure, who is an Edward Hall Professor of Archaeological Science. He's also a director of the Research Laboratory for Archaeology and the History of Art and British Academy. He's also a global professor in the School of Archaeology at the University of Oxford. He's also the current chair of the OSA Africa Knowledge Network STEM Working Group. So Professor Chirikure, in his research, he applies techniques from the natural and social sciences to study ancient materials, technologies, to derive innovations with potential use in the present. You are welcome, Professor. Last but not least is our sixth panelist, Mr. Kabalano Rampa from Botswana. He is a young African visionary who has studied world-founded organizations in both Africa and China. After spending more than a decade deeply focused in international trade between Africa and Asia, Mr. Kabelano is now dedicated to Africa's sustainable development, including establishing cross-market synergies between African organizations and international counterparts. He has experience in developing new and increased business linkages and commercial partnerships between businesses, state-owned companies, government and government agencies. You're welcome, Mr. Rampa. So thank you all for listening. So once again, thank you very much, panelists, for joining us and for your patience. Yes, so before we begin, I will ask one question each. You have about 5 to 7 minutes to respond. Then we will have questions from the audience. I will then ask you to provide, at the end, after we have responded to any questions from the audience, I'll ask you to provide your key takeaways. So please, all those who are joining from around the world, kindly keep your type your questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to respond to them. So back to the panelists, please keep your responses brief so that we can have as many questions from the audience as possible. So, so we are starting. So my first question goes to Mr. Agusu, who is the Deputy Regional Director, Regional Office for Africa, ILO. Mr. Agusu, based on your experience, what specific policies or initiatives could be pursued by African governments and other stakeholders to impart the youth with the necessary vocational skills, including STEM, STI skills that are needed by the industry? Are there any best practices from across Africa or elsewhere you could share with us? So over to you, Mr. Ogusu. You have 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson. And I think I would like to
I'm sorry,
thank all of you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Agusu. Can you put your video on, your camera on?
Oh.
Yes, I tried to put it, but it doesn't show. I don't know why.
Oh,
so
okay.
if you can help, it would be good. I'm trying to put the video, but it doesn't. Is it correct? Okay, no. I click, it doesn't show me that it is can deactivate. So I'm sorry.
Okay. Maybe we will ask our ECA colleagues who are servicing this meeting to assist. Emmanuel, can you assist, please?
In the meantime, I can continue. Huh?
Yes, please. Yeah, because of time, you can continue.
In
Thank
the
you.
interest of the time. So thank you very much, Chairperson, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I think the ADG, Christina, said very well the point of the issue of industrialization, and especially the issue of youth employment. So to complete the numbers that he gave, I can also highlight that 2 out of 3 workforce in Africa has not completed primary education. About 11% of young people participated in TVET, which is very, very low. Young people who are not in employment, in education, in training, they are about 26%. This one, it is a big, big number. And finally, 83% of employment in Africa, it is in informal employment. So in this context, I think if we want to create jobs for the young, we need effective skills policy for young people in Africa. And this policy needs to be targeted and enabling to support structural transformation and truly engage with young people. You know also that the African country is a younger, African continent is a younger continent. More than 40% of the population is aged less than 15 years. So in this regard, I think African countries can harness demographic dividends by decisively investing in training and education. That can help to have a strategic manner to empower young people. so that they can take decision and have access to means of production and commercialization. In this regard, dear colleagues, participants, I want to recommend three things. The first one is that we need that strategic investment, targeted skills and occupation that enable structural transformation while promoting decent work. And in these areas, ILO has a great experience. So the first thing that we have to do is first to identify the current and the future skills that we need, and then facilitate the design of the policy who can allow the development in STEAM or the development in the STI. So in this regard, ILO, for example, assisted many countries in such approach that we call skills for trade and economic diversification. So it is an approach that we applied in some countries like Zambia, Zimbabwe, Ghana, or Malawi. So the skills for trade and economic diversification is a set of methodology that ILO use to help countries to identify current and future skills needs. And this normally constitutes the entry point of the ILO to engage with countries in sectoral policies. After skills needs are identified, constituents can confidently target policies for skills development by sector and by occupation, and then adjust offer and adjust training offer, define insensitive policy, and prioritize government's structure as well as create career guidance. The second example that I can give in this recommendation, it is what we call work integrated learning, a program that we implemented successfully in Malawi and in other countries. The third example that I can give also is that we also support the better engagement of training with industry. So in this one, we did it by creating a tripartite, by supporting the creation of tripartite sector skills body that help adjust TVET curricula and promote targeted skills training. So the second message that I want to highlight here, the second message that I want to highlight here is that youth have, as you know, youth have diverse needs. They are diverse in diverse contexts. In this regard, they need tailored response. So what we want to say, what I want to say is that if we want to create jobs by skills for in the NEET and in the STM and the STI, we need first that policy reach young people where they are, even if they are in rural area or in urban area. Then the policy also have to raise awareness about the learning solution. And finally, we need also to offer attractive and flexible pathway to decent work in strategic occupation and sectors. And this one, we have also example with ILO, where we implemented what we call a start and improve your business program in Tanzania, where we create, for example, 11,500 businesses, and we help also the SMEs. In this area also, we can expand. We also support Benin and other countries to promote our recommendation 208 on quality apprenticeship. So this one also, it is another example. And also we support countries to develop their career guidance services. And this one can create a decent job in STM and also STI. The last message that I want to invite you to know is that the skills policy for young people do not exist in vacuum. So we need a policy coordination, partnership, and for this area, so what we propose is that skills policy for young people are often plagued by a piecemeal approach and not well coordinated with other policy. That's the reason why we propose that if we want to have a strong policy in this area, it is important that education, training, employment, economic and sensitive and social protection policies work coherently to enhance the results of our skills investment in youth for all who are involved. And this one is also implemented in South Africa, for example. It means that when we are investing in physical, we also must invest in skills, in skills to employ the generated capacity and avoid that the generation that we create are not angry. So that's are some few issues that I want to share with you. And we are also doing this one in Malawi, who is now a global accelerator or pathfinder.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Augusto, for a very comprehensive response. You have highlighted the need for strategic investment for skills development needed for industry. I would just like to highlight what you mentioned, that STEM and STI policies, that there's need for STEM and STI policies targets towards the youth in Africa, that they need to be prioritized by all African countries. You mentioned the issue of skills development in STEM and also in STI, that they should be sector specific, and this requires the creation of appropriate labor market intelligence that informs training offered to youth. And there's one thing you also mentioned, and that is the skills policies for youth. They do not exist in a vacuum. So policy coordination and partnerships are fundamental. Thank you very much, Mr. Augusto. So I've just been informed that Ms. Amel from UNESCO, she's having connection issues. Let me just check if she is back. Miss Kasri, Amel, are you back? Okay, so without wasting time, while we wait for her to reconnect, I'll move to Mr. Fernando Santiago of UNIDO.
Yes, I am here.
Okay, yeah, okay. Thank you, yeah. So, Mr. Santiago, based on your work experience with Asian countries, how can African countries effectively leverage STI policies as part of national strategies underpinning successful industrial development outcomes? This is the first part of your question. And then the second, import substitution industrialization, ISIS, has been an important arsenal of industrial policies in East Asian countries. What lessons can African countries learn from implementing such strategies, particularly in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area? So you have the floor, Fernando.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Sorry, you have 5 minutes here.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. I sent some comments, but the interesting part of it, I mean, just thank you for inviting UNIDO to participate in this debate. And just to combine a little bit the question, right? So I think the important aspect of learning from other cases and experiences is something that UNIDO, we understand, is a very important approach to improve some of the policy making and some of the policy decisions, and particularly by understanding the context, the history, and the conditions in which some decisions are taken. So what and also the presentation and at the beginning of the panel stressed some countries in Africa still pursue some import substitution strategies, right? And we know that was a very interesting, it's an important approach followed by many countries after the Second World War. But we need to understand that that has some kind of some mixed results. I mean, in the case of Latin America, for example, and Africa and some other South Asian countries, the strategy didn't work so well. For East Asian countries, it worked at the beginning. So we need to understand that at the beginning of the process of industrialization, import substitution supported, for example, Korea to reduce some of the dependence on resources, investment, try to leverage for local markets and to mobilize local firms. In some cases, like China, that was the initial step for promoting some of the light industries. And in Thailand, for example, also using the import substitution strategies to attract investment and to start creating some of the markets and for starting to create conditions for growth. But these strategies, as the countries are starting to progress in the industrialization process, were actually abandoned. And these countries were mobilizing more of an export-oriented, export-driven strategy, where the demand coming from outside and was also an incentive for companies to certain performance. Some of the differences in between the countries that were sort of successfully implementing this strategy and those that were not is because in the case of Southeast Asia, the temporality of the import substitution strategy was very well placed and was also connected with incentives and monitoring schemes for performance and sanctions, right? So companies who were not able to compete or to achieve certain standards of performance, where we were not necessarily protected. But here also, I think, and that's maybe the important part that for this discussion, and now connecting to the topics of this webinar, is that the strategies of protecting the market or creating the space for these companies to thrive was very well accompanied by policies that targeted STI activities, particularly on the technology and innovation aspects, and creating the space for companies, local companies, to what we call the technological learning, acquiring the technologies from abroad, creating the space for companies to mobilize those technologies and create new products, but also to learn to start adapting them, to start creating new technologies. And that, I think, is a major difference that when you see between countries that were successful and those that were not successful in terms of providing the space for investing in local capabilities. The idea of STI creating the space for learning and for technology acquisition was connected with with industrial policy that at the same time created the demand for the knowledge. So these companies also created spaces for new products, new services, acquiring technology, but eventually developing their own technologies, and that required skills, required infrastructure for research, for education, right? So these are some of the elements. So what I think the East Asian experience shows is that STI and industrial development policies are two sides of the same coin. They complement to one another. One side is creating the knowledge, the other one is the demand for the knowledge. And I think that's an important lesson for Africa. Africa, as we have heard now, has a very strong challenge in creating a space and contributing more strongly to knowledge creation. But you also have the challenge to create the space for mobilizing that knowledge and creating the space for local organizations, local institutions to be more incentivized to produce knowledge that addresses some of the needs for the population, of course, but also some of the needs for the companies. And so I think in terms of the experience, and a few elements that are needed in terms of the African governments. One of them is, as I said, you need to think of STI policies from the supply and from the demand side. Building infrastructure, but also mobilizing knowledge for applications and the demand that also creates for the Africa trade agreement, right? So this expands the market opportunities, not only the middle class in one country, but in the multiple countries. We have to be careful that, investment has limits. If it's not, investment strategies like only trade and investment in terms of creating productive capacities, if we don't advance in terms of producing knowledge. But technology absorption is very important, but technology absorption is not easy if you don't have the engineers, the scientists that enable you to absorb those technologies. You need to have coordination mechanisms, and you need to have some kind of governance structure that makes sure that these companies are motivated to compete. So it's STI policies with industrial policies, but you also have to think of competition, for example. And particularly in a trade area, in a free trade area, you have to be able to ensure that the markets and the regulations and the rules are there. So this is really a process that has to be long-term, that has to be connected to long-term strategies, but it's not the only one. I think we also see now, particularly on the SDGs, it's not just economic aspects. We also need to connect with social and environmental dimensions. And I think this is an important area where already some of the countries, Ghana, Kenya, are already exploring some of these, how to connect STI roadmap for SDGs and addressing social needs, and to the extent that those social needs also require industrial development. It's a mix. It's not just thinking on substituting imports, but also creating the space for making strategies that address development in a sustainable manner in the long term. So I would stop there. Maybe there is some other comments, but just in the interest of time, I think one thing is understanding the experience of ISI in East Asia, in the context, in the historical context, and the moment you are now. But I think the problem in every strategy is that if you don't combine with a substantive base and investment in STI, you have limits very quickly. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Santiago. You have highlighted the lack of both innovation capabilities and learning opportunities available for developing countries. You have also suggested the importance of leveraging the experiences of these developing Asian countries to identify possible mechanisms to develop and to promote policy learning for African countries in order for them to develop appropriate industrial policies to tackle gaps in technological capabilities. And thank you also for sharing with us the experiences of the Southeast Asian countries with regard to import substitution. That provides valuable insights into the design and implementation of effective strategies to promote industrialization in Africa. So without wasting time, I'm moving to our third panelist, Mr. Getachew Mengistu Alemu, who is an intellectual property expert. So, Mr. Alemu, you have 5 minutes to respond to the following question. So what are the existing intellectual property policy opportunities, and how can they be leveraged to advance Africa's industrialization? And how does African Continental Free Trade Area Protocol on intellectual property contribute to creating an enabling environment to promote industrialization in African countries? Mr. Alemu, you have 5 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Intellectual property is a broad concept, so I'll try to explain the opportunities offered by intellectual property in supporting industrialization in Africa by taking patent and its role as a source of valuable technological information as examples. The granting of a patent is considered as a trade-off between the state and the applicant or inventor. The state confers exclusive right to the inventor, and the inventor in return has a duty to disclose his invention in a complete and sufficient manner. Patent laws also require that an applicant should indicate the best mode of application of an invention. The reason behind these requirements lies in the need to facilitate the exploitation of the invention during after the expiry of a patent and for certain lawful purposes, such as the use of the invention for scientific research and experimentation during the validity of the patent. The number of patent applications filed and patents granted in Africa are negligible. According to the 2023 World Intellectual Property Indicator Report, Africa's share to the global patent was 0.7%. I take this as an opportunity because African countries are free to exploit technologies that are not protected in their countries and can be accessed from national, regional, and international patent databases. I may take the WIPO patent scope as an example. Africans can today access more than 117 patent documents from this single source. Maybe I will explain the value and significance of the use of technological information contained in patent documents using a success story from Ethiopia. Ethiopia used to import starch and starch products to meet the needs of the local industry. An Ethiopian entrepreneur who observed this problem had managed to extract starch from a local plant material called insect using the technological information in patent documents. And the local the product is now locally manufactured. He managed to substitute the imported product and meet the needs of the local industry. Not only that, in 2018, the enterprise reported that it provided employment opportunity for 150 permanent employees and thousands of seasonal laborers. And the manufacturing of the product locally has also provided market opportunity to the farmers. I would also briefly look at how the CFTA IP protocol contribute in advancing industrialization in Africa. The protocol provides a harmonized and comprehensive intellectual property legal framework that would support industrialization in Africa. The protocol harmonized rules and principles for the promotion, protection, and enforcement of intellectual property rights. It incorporates the principle of national treatment and most favored nation treatment that would ensure equal treatment and avoid discriminatory treatment of nationals of member states. It provides guiding principles that will be followed by member states in the development of national IP laws and policies. And it sets minimum standards that should be complied with by member states. Unlike the existing international intellectual property treaties like TRIPS, the protocol provides a comprehensive framework. It accords protection for traditional knowledge and genetic resource that may be serve as a basis for industries like pharmaceutical industries in Africa. It also adopts the regional exhaustion of rights that would help to prevent the fragmentation of the continental market and facilitate the free movement of goods. I think this is what I could say in view of the time shortage. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alemu. Thank you for highlighting opportunities offered by the intellectual property in supporting industrialization in Africa, in particular, noting the importance of the information contained in the patent applications and showcasing the success story of import substituting agribusiness in Ethiopia. You have also provided important insight into the AFCFTA intellectual property protocol, which provides a harmonized and comprehensive legal framework to drive industrialization in Africa. So moving on, our fourth panelist for today's meeting is Professor Shadrach Chirikure, who is also the chair of the OSA Africa Knowledge Network. Professor Chirikure, the AU Agenda 2063 recognizes STI as crucial to Africa's sustainable development. What can African countries do to accelerate the promotion of STEM and STI policies? You have the floor, Professor.
Thank you so much. The short answer to your question is a lot, and I could end here and hear others. However, forget about Elon Musk for a while. Mansa Musa, the king of the medieval empire of Mali that flourished in the 14th century, is considered by the Economist magazine as the wealthiest person that ever lived, right? Mansa Musa was not advised by the IMF. He was not advised by the World Bank. Neither was he advised by external consultants that come to Africa and sell us the gospel of STEM and STI. In 1963, Kwame Nkrumah argued that science and technology would stimulate Africa's development. At the same time, there are many African countries that were at the same level of development as South Korea. Now, in 2024, we take South Korea as an example to follow. Where am I going with this? Right. To accelerate the promotion of STEM and STI policies, the African countries must consider changing the mindset. That's the main problem. In Africa, we love consumption, we love eating things that we do not produce. If we change the mindset to focus on production, as my previous colleague said, we can focus on export-oriented industrialization, and we can also exchange with each other, taking advantage of the strategies across Africa's different regions. Ngugi wa Thiong'o referred to this as the need to decolonize the minds and to use STEM and inspiration from the Egyptian pyramids, from Great Zimbabwe, and the other places. If we change our mindsets, if we focus on production, we can fix energy issues, we can fix communication challenges, and we can create employment. We also need skills development and capacity building. But for us to get there, there is need for a curriculum review to change the entire curriculum. It doesn't work. We do some things at tertiary, some things at secondary that never gets to basic education. So we also need to ensure that what we teach, that STEM, STI is part and parcel from a very early age. What's the point of teaching our children how long is the Yellow River when we are dying of hunger, when we don't have jobs? Then we need to respect African talent, right? What is the point of relying or over-relying on a system that thrives on extracting resources from Africa? That is one of the paradoxes in terms of development, that the continents, the communities whose own success, whose own industrialization is based on the exploitation of African, resources. Right? We are competing with them. How do we deal with that? We also have to invest in our own talent, respect that, grow our own timber, as it were. Then the other point relates to governance, right? Are the best Africans doing the jobs, right? Democracy is good, but it's not always about the most competent. It's about the most popular. So how can we ensure that the best people with the best skills, they implement STEM and STI policies? And we also need visionary leadership in terms of those countries that have banned the export of lithium. Can we see some of the largest battery manufacturing companies in the world emerging from those countries, or is just talk? So we need action, and we need to talk less, and the benefits should also accrue to local people. And then my final point is that we must make STEM and STI compulsory. If their transformative power cannot be contested, why are they given to us as options? So it means from the moment that a child goes to school, they must start to learn STI, STEM, and gain the skills, so that by the time we expect them to innovate with the startups at university, it's already in their blood, and it's something that is already being done. And if we do all of this, if we change our mindsets, if we make our own things, if we resource our own institutions, and if we emphasize more in terms of action and less of talks and seminars and the like, then I hope we can accelerate the implementation of STEM and STI policies. And the jobs that the Madam USG was talking about, 80 million jobs, we will have them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Shadrack, for highlighting some of the key areas African countries should undertake to accelerate the promotion of STEM and STI policies. And these are change of mindset, skills development and capacity building, revamping the education system to build STEM education, respect of African talent, good governance, and visionary leadership. Thank you. So we move on to Mr. Kabalano Rampa, our African private sector youth entrepreneur. Mr. Rampa, in your view, as a young African business person, how can African governments, including through strengthening partnership with the private sector and academics, enhance STEM and digital education to develop requisite technical skills in youth to ensure that they have relevant skills required by industry? Mr. Rampa, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very, very much, Rumbi, for that. First and foremost, I'd like to really just divulge briefly on the role of private sector in STEM enhancement. And the first thing I want to mention, which actually would go to what Professor Shadrack was saying, was investment in continuous learning and development. A lot of companies and private organizations, definitely invest in continuous learning and development to stay on point, to stay above the market. But I really think it's something that should become a bit more compulsory within organizations, especially businesses, that can make sure that the employees continuously keep learning, continuously keep upskilling themselves. The second one is strategic partnerships with educational institutions. We really believe strategic partnerships in terms of being able to offer scholarships, being able to offer different competitions for students, for youth, like hackathons, like math competitions, should be something that should be a basis for every CSR mandate in the private sector. The third one would be creating ecosystems for STEM talent nurturing. One thing that Professor Shredrick mentioned is that there's a lot that we can learn from other continents and other countries like Korea, because they went ahead and created ecosystems and went deep into those ecosystems with the private sector, with governments, with educational institutions. So this is something that we really need to do as a private sector, where we're able to create ecosystems to start nurturing the talent straight from a grassroots level, straight from primary school to high school to varsity. The next one would be embracing advanced technologies for enhanced learning and development. A lot of companies now are using AI to improve their market share, are using AI to improve their productivity. We should be able, as the private sector, to use AI, to use virtual reality, to use augmented reality, to be able to improve STEM in educational sectors, to improve STEM in our communities, where we don't just have our CSR mandate or our STEM enhancement strategies based towards where we work, but where we're able to spread it to the rural areas, to remote areas, via technology, where we're able to give opportunities to the youth, to students, to be able to take part and have proper experiences via virtual reality, via augmented reality, and learn better. The next one would be advocating for policy changes to support STEM education and employment. As a private sector, we definitely lobby and a lot and advocate for a lot of policy changes, mainly tax reductions. But I think in this case, we should be able to think more differently, think outside the box. In fact, just throw in the box altogether and think about being able to advocate for policy changes that will reduce taxes, or will be able to give incentives for companies to invest in the STEM initiatives, to invest deeper into STEM ecosystems and partnerships for the betterment of the whole economy. The last one I'll just talk about is building continental and global networks and collaborations. We have noticed that even with now the AFTC agreements, we still have a lot of organizations in the private sector working in silos or working within their industries. I really think it's about time we build deeper and much more advanced global connections and collaborations, starting in the continent. And what better way to do this than being able to share different strategies on enhancing STEM, than being able to collaborate and find opportunities and exchange knowledge and best practices in terms of being able to push STEM enhancements in different continents. And just as a
one more minute, yeah.
Thank you very much. And just as a takeaway intervention for this, and this is just simple and straight to the point, and it's actually now being implemented in other continents, is what they call the STEM enrichment programs. And these are basically just programs that bring together all these players, the private sector, the government, educational institutions, where they just come together and find different programs that gel their mandates together, find solutions, find innovations, try different ways of being able to enhance STEM in the local areas and all around the remote places, and learn from these, and learn from these, and learn from these. Keep on learning, and that is something that we really need to implement as a continent.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Rampa, for informing us on one of the initiatives African governments can use to enhance STEM and digital education from grassroots level. And this is the STEM enrichment programs. And you also noted how governments can partner with financial institutions to enhance math and financial literacy in children from a very young age. You also highlighted the importance of education and skills development, which one of our speakers have alluded to. You also noted the need to review education curricula, enhance education system with a stronger focus on AI and digital transformation from the grassroots level. Thank you very much. So we are moving back to Miss Amel Kastri. She was not able to connect earlier, but I've been informed that she's back on the line. Miss Kastri, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
so
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm happy that you are back. So without wasting any time, I'm going straight to the question. So Miss Kastri,
I apologize for this. There was a connection problem. I apologize for that.
No. I'm happy that we are happy that you are back with us here. So Miss Kastri, Africa remains the least industrialized region in the developing world, viewed in terms of both the share of manufacturing value added in output and employment. How can African countries promote STEM education programs to ensure that the continent has a sufficient skilled workforce and is able to enhance competitiveness in manufacturing production? I know it's a mouthful. So, Ms. Kastri, you have 5 minutes to respond. Thank you.
Thank you for accepting my apologies for this connection problems. Actually, it was Kirjan because currently, actually, I'm in Rwanda and I just had a meeting with the Minister of Education where we discussed the same issue actually, and this. And let's go place last April, which is the Africa STI Forum, and that was held in Addis Ababa in April. And the summary of recommendation is that the promotion of STEM education programs in African countries and the African continent in general, and more specifically to ensure a sufficiently skilled workforce is, of course, a multifaceted challenge, and it requires a wide range of approaches, initiatives, and priorities to address. So let me briefly go through these initiatives and the priorities and what we do here at UNESCO to address these challenges and the priorities. First of all, the education and the skill development, this is extremely important. So it's very important to improve the STEM education and to equip the youth with necessary skills and to prepare graduates for future job opportunities, and also to review the education curricula for better alignment with research, especially the research that can address the current societal needs and the societal developments. Also, it's very important to enhance the education system with a stronger focus on the emerging issues such as AI and the digital transformation. And a very important topic now is to promote the entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship skills here, it doesn't only mean starting companies, which is also important, but it means also the skills to take the innovative ideas from the lab to the market. And on that, I would like to emphasize one of the programs we are currently working on for the past 1.5 years at UNESCO, where we organize a series of boot camps to equip the scientists and the researchers with these skills, how to go out from the lab, how to take their innovative ideas one step ahead and go to the market. In fact, we did our first boot camp in Africa and last year, and we trained about 71 scientists from 10 different African countries on this linking science to entrepreneurship. And another one will take place in September for the same purpose. It's also important to empower the teachers and the students to use digital tools and also to create safe space for children and especially girls and women. It's also important to encourage collaboration and strengthen the science policy. International collaboration is very important. And here I would like to emphasize that we have currently the International Decade of Sciences for Sustainable Development. So one of the important things that we need to address now is how to utilize this International Decade of Science for Sustainable Development as an opportunity for collective action. And UNESCO is the lead agency, and currently we are working with many other UN agencies and with many other stakeholders in both the natural science sectors and the social science sectors around the world in order to utilize this opportunity. It is a great opportunity to show the value of science. And here I would like to mention that Africa is one of the UNESCO's two global priorities. We have two global priorities at UNESCO, as you might know, Africa and gender equality, with the significant resources allocated for 5 different flagship programs in the continents. UNESCO has been actively contributing to promote STEM education in Africa through various types of activities. We do hands-on training activities using tools. In return, they can help the students to think critically, to develop their judging criteria. And we also work on empowering girls. UNESCO is putting a spotlight on girls' education in STEM, where significant gender disparities persist in Africa. So we are doing research policy and capacity building to promote the empowerment of girls and women through education. Also, promotion of digital skills, as I already mentioned. So over the next 5 years, UNESCO plans to increase access for girls and women to digital skills and competencies in STI, in the STEM education opportunities. We are also working closely with member states, with other UN agencies and other partners to leverage collective expertise and resources to scale up this impact. The teacher, I mentioned the teacher training and the digital to empower the women and girls and to strengthen their digital skills and also to collaborate. And in that, I would like to emphasize one example, which is the UNESCO L'Oreal program. This program has established a partnership called Women in Science, and was a component to support young talents. And so far, over 4,000 young talents in Africa have been, actually around the world, have been supported since the beginning of this partnership. Specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, the number of grants per year has increased from 20 to 30, including 25 for about 10,000 euro per grant. And also for doctors, for PhD students, 15,000 euro per grant. And also for postdoctoral. So it's really covering a wide range of grants for to support women scientists in Africa. To conclude, I would like to reaffirm that UNESCO's commitment to collaborate with member states in Africa, with academia, with private sector, with the civil society representatives are crucial for us to address these areas and also to continue advocate for science for sustainable development. And to conclude also, I would like to emphasize one initiative hard now in Africa, which is supporting African scientists to get remote access to scientific laboratory equipment. Currently, we give for one specific technique, 3 countries in Africa now have access to remote access to scientific techniques. So the scientists can remain home and they can access these equipment. They can do high quality research and also enhance the opportunities to collaborate with other laboratories and other scientists around the world. So this is my my comment on that.
Oh.
Promote the STEM education in Africa and also science and technology in Africa. And thank you very much. And apologies again that you cannot see me now speaking. Thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you so much, Ms. Kasri, that you were able to join, in spite of the technical internet challenges you're having in Rwanda. So, and thank you for highlighting the following areas that need to be undertaken to ensure that the continent has sufficient skilled workforce that is able to enhance Africa's industrialization. You spoke about the need for education and skills development in STEM education, partnership and collaboration between the academia and industry, and cooperation among countries. You spoke about the evidence-based and inclusive STI policies, and you spoke about the support, access to information and knowledge sharing, and ensuring good data governance as a foundation for scientific freedom. And thank you for informing us on UNESCO's initiatives, quite a number that you shared with us, to strengthen STI systems in Africa. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our panel discussion. I would like to thank our panelists for the very insightful conversation we have had, for the information they shared with us. We really appreciate. And we do have some questions in the chat box, but I'm just looking at my watch. We are only left with 5 minutes. So thank you for all of you who have submitted some questions in the chat box. We will do our best to respond in writing after the meeting. And given that we are only left with 5 minutes, I will now hand over to to Kava, our moderator for this event. Kava, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ms. Adebayo, for moderating this panel discussion. A special appreciation to all the panelists for their thought-provoking interventions. It's unfortunate because of time constraints, we are not able to take any of the questions from the chat. As we approach the end of our webinar, I would like now to invite Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, Director, Policy Monitoring and Advocacy, Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Adam, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kava. And thank you once again to all of the panelists for really, I think, giving us a fantastic overview of what I will call maybe the game changers that are required for us to truly tap into the opportunity for science, technology, and innovation for sustainable industrialization. I would like to thank all of the speakers for their contribution, and also emphasize that we see this discussion as informing some of the outcomes of the Summit for the Future that is happening in September this year. And this Summit for the Future, it will very much define how the United Nations engages with precisely these challenges, the challenges of acceleration of the Sustainable Development Goals. And all of the inputs that have been made here will also inform the finalization of the policy brief that we'll be using for our engagement with this process on the Summit for the Future, but also working with the African Union Commission, our key partners, in terms of how we translate these policies into implementation across the continent. A few takeaways rapidly. First, 3 key messages. That number 1, that STI policies should be closely aligned with industrial policies as a source of complementarity, and each should feed the other. And that means also having a willingness to evolve those policies as industrialization takes place, and adapting those policies to needs. And that means also at the continental level, and responding perhaps to some of the comments that were placed in the chat, that means addressing in particular the regulatory function of the AFCFTA in terms of intellectual property, and adapting that to the needs of the continent as a whole, recognizing that we are feeding internal needs, particularly around industrialization of food systems, of digital transformation, while also looking at the role that Africa can play globally, particularly harnessing the demographic dividend and allowing Africa to be the powerhouse for global economic growth and feeding that towards its own development. Secondly, science, technology, and innovation are critical enablers and solutions for the advancement of industrialization. And this has to be looked at in the context of the quality of employment that will be created. And our Under-Secretary General has emphasized this need to move beyond informality. And harnessing this demographic dividend will play a key role in promoting resilient and peaceful societies. Thirdly, Africa needs to make greater investments in science, technology, and innovation to be more efficient and competitive. And this will unlock the economic opportunity that is directly linked to the use of science and evidence-based policies. And this also means properly addressing intellectual property rights across the continent, and in a way which enhances, for example, Africa's natural capital, its the value of its biodiversity, but also the ideas that emerge from Africa. And to conclude, allow me to focus on some cross-cutting themes that also came out. Firstly, we have to build the educational platform that allows this to happen through science, technology, engineering, and mathematics programs. And these have to be done both within the educational system and across, for example, offering these to people already in employment. This also means linking it to financial literacy, the availability of financing, including the empowerment of small, medium, and enterprises, and having education and skills development as something which is embedded in educational systems, but is also available within the workforce. This also requires, and I think was very well articulated, that we need a change of mindset, building on Africa's very rich history on science, technology, and innovation, which is not new. There is a history of this happening, and it is about empowering it in a modern and global context. And this also means addressing gender disparities, and to do so both in terms of education and inclusion in terms of research, employment, and entrepreneurial opportunities. I would like to then conclude by saying this also has to be situated within strong leadership from African policymakers. We have some very good policies at the regional level, including the African Union Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy for Africa 2024, the African Digital Transformation Strategy, as well as the most recent new second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063. This needs to be strengthened by individual policies at the national level and commitments in terms of resources from individual governments, as well as support from partners. To conclude, I would like to say that we will e-publish the policy brief on the same theme of this webinar, and this will be featured on OSA's website, and we look forward to your engagement on this. I would like to especially thank our moderators, Mr. Kava Kachumise and Rumbidzai Adebayo, for moderating this event and engaging with the partners. I would like to thank the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa for their technical support for the platform, as well as the interpreters. And thank you to everyone for your support for this webinar. And we look forward in particular to working with all partners on implementing this policy space. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone, and a good evening for those who are already in the afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hmm.